So bon dia and bienvenidos my hungry amigos, and welcome to Algarve Appetite with me, your host, Portuguese Jimmy. And also welcome back to Chicken Friday. But if you've seen our previous videos, you know that we have a new format.
Chicken Friday, Piri Piri Podcast.
So I thought it was most appropriate that the first guest on the channel was me, Portuguese Jimmy. This is my journey that led me here. From a childhood in Essex, growing up in Scotland, hundreds of business ideas to finally settling in Portugal and launching Algarve Appetite. It's a story filled with adventure, failures, reinventions, and if I'm being honest, some pretty bad decisions. So, strap in. It's going to be a long one. Let's start the beginning.
My early years and growing up.
So I was born in Chelmsford in Essex in 1969, the first of three kids. My sister Claire arrived in 1971 and brother Will in 73. We moved around a fair bit, first to Yorkshire and then King's Kettle and Fife, and that's where I spent my formative years. Now, moving to Scotland in the 1980s with an extremely English accent, well, my life wasn't particularly easy, and I stood out like a sore thumb. What made it worse was my full name, which of course you had to call out at roll call. So my full name is James Anthony Howard Russell, which is about as English as a member of the royal family. So you can imagine the situation after calling James Anthony Howard Russell right before wee Ech McBanter and Dougie McSporran. So I was kind of a target for bullying and a bit of harassment, certainly in my younger days. But I quickly learned that humour was the best defence, and if you can make people laugh, they're probably less likely to punch you in the face. But honestly, I had pretty tragic fashion choices and a lot of dodgy haircuts. So I kind of gave people, plenty of reasons to laugh. I wasn't a cool kid. I had a bad haircut, questionable fashion sense, and the unfortunate habit of wearing whatever my mum bought me. But what I lacked in style, I made up for in work ethic. I got my first job at 14 with my best pal, Billy Fishy Allen, working in Geordie Robertson's milk float. So we were up at 4 a.m. with no health and safety in sight. And let's say we got pretty creative on our time on the float. I remember clearly on icy mornings, the two of us used to hang on the back rails of the float and ski on the icy roads, sometimes up to like 40 or 50 miles an hour. It was kind of crazy. During the summers, I worked for my dad's business, recycling precious metals from glass electrodes when they didn't meet the quality checks. It wasn't that glamorous, but I learned a lot about making money then and understood that it was something I quite enjoyed. Then came my most bizarre teenage job, which was working as a domestic helper in a local psychiatric hospital. I was assigned to the high security ward, which may sound terrifying, but in reality, it was one of the cushiest jobs available. The patients there weren't allowed metal cutlery or ceramic tableware, so my job mostly involved throwing away paper plates and plastic cutlery at the end of the meal and quickly mopping the floor. That gave me plenty of time to read my book, and at that time I was engrossed in The Shining by Stephen King. Let's just say, if you're hearing eerie noises and screams down the hall from a high security psychiatric unit, the book takes on a whole new level of horror. So that was my childhood, awkward, a bit chaotic, full of strange jobs, and unknowingly setting the foundation for a life of jumping from one adventure to another.
College and my early 20s.
So let's move on to my college years and my early 20s. After leaving school, I decided to pursue higher education and started an HND in chemistry. Not exactly my passion, but hey, I thought it might lead to something sensible, and most of my dad's families and friends were in the lab trade, so that kind of made sense. To fund my studies, I took a weekend job at Texas Home Care, which some may remember later became Homebase. This was my first proper experience dealing with the general public, and let me tell you, It was an education in human stupidity. One day there was this young lady that came into the shop, and they called me on the tannoy as she was having problems with her car. She said it wasn't driving correctly or steering correctly. So I went outside and checked, and immediately spotted it was a flat tire. So I said, "Oh, it's okay. You've got a flat." I said, "Do you have a spare?" To which she kind of looked at me really confused and said, "A spare what?" And I said, "A spare wheel." She then walked around the car and counted and told me there's 4 of them. And then I remember one specific colleague, a guy who was about the same age as me, in his mid-20s. He really didn't want to be there, but he had a mischievous sense of humor. And he used to get a kick out of going up to the normally elderly gentleman that bought greenhouses and sheds, and went right up to them and said, "Hey, do you want an erection?" And then he paused just long enough for the old man to start spluttering in outrage before quickly adding, "Oh, for the greenhouse, it's an extra service we provide." Yeah, it was kind of crazy. After a relatively short stint at Homebase, I realized that working retail wasn't for me. So I did what any ambitious young man would do, and I started my own business.
My first business.
By the late 1980s, many of my school friends had picked up guitars and drumsticks and formed a rock band called Roy G. Biv. Now, I'd love to say that I was the musical genius behind the group, but of course, that would be a complete lie. However, I did come up with a name, Roy G. Biv, acronym for Colours of the Rainbow. I thought it was a perfect name. I'd always fancied myself as a singer, so I convinced them to let me audition at their first practice. And let me tell you that my vocals were so incredible that the band immediately offered me the role of manager. So determined to make the most of it, I secured a loan for £5,000 from the Prince's Trust, which allowed us to invest in a proper PA system, some amplifiers, and all the gear we needed to play real gigs. Before long, Roy G. Biv was tearing up the Scottish pub and club scene, and my job as band manager and promoter became a real business. Soon I caught the attention of other struggling musicians, and that's when Ian Harrower, the frontman of a band called Dead Reckoning, approached me. The two bands were very different. If Roy G. Biv was all energy and chaos, Dead Reckoning was more refined, a bit like Tom Petty compared to Guns N' Roses. Anyway, I wasn't just managing one band anymore, I had a full roster. Of course, one of the problems with managing musicians is a bit like herding drunk cats. Creative differences, late night arguments, and unreliable singers meant my independent band management business didn't really last so long. But my time in the music business was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. One of the best things that came from this venture was meeting with Ian Harrower. Back in 1989, he was an experienced and worldly wise 29-year-old when I was still in my 20s. Over the years, we've had plenty of crazy business ideas together, and his imagination, paired with my tenacity, made for an interesting partnership. And this led me to my next venture, Smithfield Entertainments. Smithfield Entertainments was really just an extension of what Ian and I had already been doing for 6 months. Except now it was official. With Roy G. Biv and Dead Reckoning both split up, we pivoted from managing bands to offering services for hire. We handled band tour logistics, PA and lighting hire, and live music promotion. Over the next 2 years, we built a strong reputation across Scotland, culminating in our biggest project, Fife Rock, an all-day music festival at the Adam Smith Centre in Kirkcaldy in the summer of 1991. We even planned to release an accompanying CD featuring 9 of the performing bands. But unfortunately, Fife Rock was a bit of a disaster. We barely broke even, and despite the effort, we couldn't even afford to release the album. But that's a story for later in the journey, nearly 3 decades later, in fact. By 1992, Ian and I were exhausted from the late nights, the endless road trips, and a dodgy transit van, and the unpredictable chaos of the music industry. It was time to move on.
The love of my life.
I ended up back at Homebase, my old stomping ground. And while it wasn't an incredible career move, it turned out to be life-changing nonetheless, because this is where I met Amanda, the love of my life. Amanda was only 17 at the time, and she'd been through a lot. She had lost her father just a couple of years earlier to cancer, and her mother Sadie was doing what a lot of people would do in these times of grief, try and rebuild their lives, quite literally. She decided to buy a brand new kitchen, and as fate would have it, the charming 23-year-old kitchen salesman, that's me, won the deal. Now, if you've experienced a kitchen sale at home base, you'll know it isn't a seamless experience. Missing parts, damaged units, and a logistical nightmare. And for Amanda and Sadie, unfortunately, this was no exception. What I didn't know at the time was Amanda had taken quite a shine to me, and rather than just letting fate intervene, she decided to use the kitchen disaster as an excuse to keep calling the store. Every time she rang, she insisted that Mr. Russell personally dealt with her complaints. Now, being the oblivious oaf that I just thought she was another disgruntled customer, and I was simply doing my job. But eventually fate would give us a nudge. One day Amanda called not to complain about a missing cupboard door, but to proudly announce that she'd passed a driving test. And out of the blue, she said, "Would you like to go out on a date to celebrate?" Now, Amanda's always been very petite, and at first I wasn't sure exactly how old she was. But as soon as I knew she was old enough to drive, I figured out she'd be suitable dating age. So, just like that, with one phone call, my life took a turn that would lead to a lifetime together.
Back to college.
After wrapping up Smithfield Entertainments, I had a moment of clarity, and I realised that while I might not have made a fortune in the music business, what I was good at and what I really enjoyed was organising and managing events. And I considered this to be one of my strengths. So instead of diving back into yet another venture blindly, I decided to go back to college and get the skills to do it properly. In September 1992, just a few months after I met Amanda, I enrolled in my second HND course, this time in promotion and events management. 24-year-old Jim was very different from the 18-year-old chemistry student. This time I had some life experience and realized that I really wanted to do well at this course. The course had two major components. The first was a 6-week placement at the end of the first year, and the second was the final project. Each class had to plan, promote, and finance a real-life conference or exhibition. Really, for the first time in my life, I excelled academically. It wasn't really because I'd become a straight-A student or any brighter, but I actually kind of really cared about getting this qualification. And I knew that it was preparing me for the next big move in my life.
An internship in the USA.
As the first year of my college course was coming to an end, it was time for the all-important work placement. Most students were being assigned to UK venues such as the NEC in Birmingham, which is a well-known and respected exhibition and conference facility. And while it's a solid placement, I had my sights set somewhere further afield. Through a family friend, I managed to secure an internship with the Interface Group near Boston in Massachusetts. Now, this wasn't just any company. They were the people behind Comdex, one of the largest technology trade shows in the world, which attracted over 250,000 attendees every year. For a 24-year-old Scottish lad with a passion for events, this was like getting a golden ticket. When I arrived in Boston, I was thrown right in the deep end, and it was a whirlwind of high-profile meetings, meticulous planning, and witnessing the sheer scale of what organizing an event like this involved. I was running errands one minute and sitting in on logistic discussions next. Then, with a stroke of pure luck, I was in a meeting with the marketing manager and discussed how much I would like to attend one of their shows. And luckily, through pure luck, he agreed to fly me to Comdex in Atlanta. Suddenly, I wasn't just reading about these massive shows, I was right in the middle of it. Thousands of exhibitors, major tech companies unveiling their latest innovations, and an atmosphere buzzing with business deals and networking. It was a dream come true. The best part, at the end of the 6-week placement, the company even offered me a full-time job. That was an incredible opportunity. The kind of offer people can only dream of. But there was a problem, and it was Amanda. Yeah, I'd fallen hard for her, and the thought of leaving her behind just didn't sit with me. So although it was tempting to stay in the USA and launch my career over there with one of the world's leading event organizers, I made the decision to return home. It was a gamble, but it's one I've never regretted.
Entering the scientific software market.
After graduating from college in the summer of 1994, I was at a crossroads. I'd just completed a qualification that I was very proud of, but instead of heading straight into events management, life had other plans. A family friend approached me with a business opportunity that was completely unexpected. An American software company was looking to expand into the European market, and they needed somebody to sell and market the products in the UK. At first, it seemed a bit of a bizarre fit because I'd been managing bands, promoting live events, and planning music festivals. But when I actually looked at it in depth, I had everything that they needed. I realized, strangely enough, I was the perfect candidate. Firstly, my father's business was in the scientific lab trade, so I'd always been in that world since I was young. I'd also studied chemistry before switching to events management, so I at least had a background understanding of the fundamentals of the field. And on top of that, through my years of band management and event promotion, I'd unknowingly had a strong foundation in sales, negotiation, and marketing, as well as some pretty in-depth computer skills. The software itself was incredibly niche, and it's designed for scientists using chromatography analysis, a field that most people have never even heard of. But where others saw complexity, I saw it as an opportunity. If I could promote rock bands in dodgy Scottish pubs, surely I could sell software to labs. At first, I worked independently, working exclusively within the UK. I learned the ropes and figured out the market, but over time my role expanded. Eventually I became responsible for all global sales and marketing, a position that's not only taken me all over the world, but that I still hold to this day. What started as an unexpected job opportunity has turned into a 30-year career. It's given me both financial stability, the ability to explore other business ventures, and a great work-to-life balance.
Our family grows.
After a whirlwind few years of career shifts, band management, and business ventures, life finally started to settle down into something resembling normality. Amanda and I moved into our first home together, a modest two-bedroom flat in Auchtermuchty, a small town in Fife, about 40 miles from Edinburgh. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And, as if on cue, our little family began to grow, not with children just yet, but with a dog. Enter Bo, a feisty little mix of Jack Russell and German Shepherd, with an attitude of both brands combined. She was a wonderful dog. She served us really well and lived till she was about 15 years old, lived a long and happy life. We all loved her. Then, Amanda and I got married in the summer of 1997, and 2 years later, the spring of 99, our son Liam was born. Shortly after Liam arrived, fate threw us a lucky break. The owners of the flat upstairs from us decided to sell, and we saw the opportunity, so we bought the upper flat, knocked everything through, and transformed it into a proper 5-bedroom family home. And we lived there for 30 years until we moved to Portugal in 2021. Suddenly, our little starter flat had become a home where we could actually put down some roots. Through all this, my career in scientific software continued to grow, and what had started as an unexpected job offer had turned into a stable long-term career, one that provided financial security while giving me the flexibility to chase new ideas. Unfortunately, shortly after Liam was born, those who were around then may remember the Y2K crash. And what happened was any technology companies that did well in the late 90s suddenly saw business fall off a cliff as we entered the new millennium. So, very briefly, I jumped into the unknown once again and got my first ever job.
Not cut out for the corporate world.
For a brief moment in time, I decided to try something completely different and took on what would be my first and only real-time job as a full-time employee, leaving Amanda back at the house to continue to run the software business. My employer was a company in Livingston called Ion Networks. Get it? It's like keep your eye on your network. Terrible name and terrible experience. I'm not saying that the job was particularly bad. The money was good, but the work environment was just soul destroying. I decided I just wasn't built for the 9-to-5 routine and the corporate world. In fact, I just wasn't cut out to be someone else's employee. I needed to be in control of my own destiny. And if that meant diving headfirst into yet another business venture, then so be it.
Music, laughs, and great friends.
They say you never leave music behind, and it always finds a way to creep back into your life. And that's exactly what happened to me. When I turned 30, the music bug hit again. But this time I wasn't managing bands, I was actually in one. Although one of the minor hurdles was that I didn't play a musical instrument. But that didn't stop me. I bought a drum kit and a set of sticks, roped in my brother Will into playing guitar, and we started a band. We also had a bass player, my brother-in-law Paul, but this was only brief. Unfortunately, Paul had a unique approach to band commitment, which mostly involved not turning up at all to band practice. So after too many no-shows, we did what any self-respecting band would do, and we fired him. But that left us with a bit of a situation. We were a two-piece band with no bass player. But instead of trying to find another unreliable human being, I had a better idea. Why don't we replace Paul with a computer? With my background in technology, I put together some backing tracks that we could play straight from a PC. And just like that, Riddle was born, a fully functional two-man band with a virtual third member. Firstly, we got stuck into the local pub and club scene, playing a mix of Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tom Petty, and everything in between. To our surprise, people actually liked us and the gigs kept rolling in. Before long, we started looking further afield. So to break into the wedding circuit, we needed a bigger set list, something more polished, and most importantly, we needed a killer vocalist. Enter Sammy, a local karaoke queen with a powerhouse voice who could belt out Tina Turner, Kelly Clarkson, and everything else that we threw at her. With Sammy on board, Riddle transformed from a fun pub band to a fully fledged wedding act. For a while, it was incredible. We were playing 3 or 4 nights a week, bringing in some good money and having an absolute blast. But wedding gigs, they're kind of a difficult beast. Long nights, endless set lists, and drunk uncles always demanding songs that the band can't play for the 15th time. It was pretty exhausting. In fact, by the summer of 2016, my brother Will decided he wanted to move on to other musical projects, and Sammy and I agreed it was time to hang up the microphone and drumsticks. Our final gig was on June 25th, 2016 at the Kettle Bridge Inn. I remember the date very well because a few hours later, in the early hours of June 26th, my second child, Danny, was born. Talk about perfect timing. Riddle had been an amazing chapter in my life. It reignited my love for music, introduced me to some great friends, and gave me some unforgettable moments. But as this chapter closed, another far bigger, far less predictable one was about to begin.
Core Audio.
After Riddle ended, I found myself in an interesting situation. I owned a load of musical equipment, PA gear, speakers, lights, you name it. And I thought to myself, why not turn this into another business? That's when Core Audio was born. At its heart, Core Audio was a PA and lighting hire company. But in many ways, it was an extension of what I'd been doing with Smithfield Entertainment all over again, managing events, working with bands, and putting on live performances. It was a natural extension of everything I'd done before, but this time with a bit more experience under my belt. One of the most exciting projects under Core Audio came from an old friend, none other than Ian Harrower. If you've been paying attention, you'll remember Ian from the Smithfield Entertainment days back in the 90s. He and I had been through it all, bands, gigs, festivals, so it was only natural that we'd team up again, but this time we had a brilliant idea, a comedy festival. We called it the Octamukty Comedy Festival, a name as ambitious as the event itself. And with a tagline like "Wear the Fox Hat," we knew we were onto something special.
When I told the folks back home that I was coming to Octamukty, they said, "Wear the fox hat."
We booked some of the best up-and-coming comedians from across the UK and hosted shows all across Fife and beyond. And Wear the Fox Hat Comedy Festival was a roaring success. Core Audio as a whole thrived for several years, becoming a go-to service for bands, event organisers and venues that needed top-notch sound and lighting equipment. It was fun and very lucrative for a while. It felt like I'd finally found the perfect blend of business and passion. But, and there's always a but, all good things come to an end. In 2012, an event I organised through Core Audio would prove to be one of the biggest risks and, unfortunately, the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life. But we can't talk about that just yet, because first, I have some other businesses that I've been involved with that we need to discuss.
BWB Technologies.
So the next thing I'd like to talk about is BWB Technology and my role as International Business Development Manager. In 2009, my life was a beautiful mess of overlapping ventures, software sales, playing gigs with Riddle, running Core Audio, and you'd think that I'd have enough to keep me busy. But then another opportunity knocked on my door. I was approached by BWB Technologies, a British-based but American-owned company that specialized in scientific instruments, specifically flame photometers. Now, if you don't know what those are, don't worry, you're in good company. All you need to know is it helps scientists analyze elements in liquid samples. The job title, International Business Development Manager. The reality, sales and marketing and a whole load of business travel. Unlike my role in the software industry where I was working as my own boss, BWB was a bit different. I wasn't technically an employee, I had my own UK company. I invoiced the American owners for my services. So I was kind of like a pseudo-employee. So I had the best of both worlds, the freedom of working independently with the privilege of a fancy job title. And let's be honest, it was a pretty good gig. I got to go to California for a training session with the company owner. That was followed by trips all over Europe, building relationships with distributors and customers, and then a particularly memorable trip to Thailand where I worked on setting up a sales network in the Far East. Now, for most people, this would have been a dream setup. Decent money, international travel, and a steady stream of business opportunities. In 2024, things started shifting. The company was looking for someone to buy them, and my own commitments, both personal and professional, were pulling me in different directions. I knew it was time to move on, and so after 5 years of fascinating and enjoyable work, I agreed with the business owner that it was time for me to walk away. There was no regrets, no drama, and we're still great friends to this day. As BWB straddled across my time with Core Audio, now we need to jump back to about 2009, 2010, and the concept of the Big Stooshie.
The Big Stooshie and Bankruptcy.
You know that moment when you think you finally cracked it, that this is the big one. After years of hard work and passion, your business smarts are finally going to pay off. Yeah, well, that's not going to be one of these stories. In 2012, my work with Core Audio had built up a solid reputation, and I'd partnered with my friend, a guy called Ewan Muir, who was a local pub owner. And we put on a bunch of successful pub events together. We knew we could pull it off on a small scale, and we had the contacts, the experience, and the equipment, and a growing audience. So it felt like the next big step, the most logical step, was to go big. We weren't just going to put on another event. We were going to create Scotland's first ever full-scale charity music festival. A 3-day multi-band spectacle. Not only would it be an incredible experience for music lovers, but it would raise huge sums of money for charity. We called it the Big Stooshie, Scotland's charity music festival. We secured a prime venue, an equestrian centre in Fife, which was big enough to accommodate 12,000 people over the 3 days. We booked some incredible acts, and we had top-tier staging, sound and lighting. We had an outdoor bar, food vendors and camping areas. The entire thing was planned meticulously and executed to perfection. It should have been a massive success, but it wasn't. Despite everything going right in terms of organisation, one critical thing went disastrously wrong, and it was a turnout. We planned for 12,000 people, but we got less than 2,000. If you've ever run an event, you'll know that ticket sales are not just about covering the costs. They're about everything. Every stage, every light, every act, every generator, every security guard, it all costs money up front. And with a fraction of the expected attendees, that money wasn't coming back. The financial fallout was immediate and devastating. We had sunk everything we had into this. When the final numbers came in, I was left with personal losses of over £70,000. We'd managed to pay off most of the performers and the contractors, but unfortunately didn't raise any money for the charities involved, Help for Heroes of Safa, and found ourselves in a big financial black hole. I apologise, I hope you can still see me okay. It was supposed to rain all day today and it's supposed to be cloudy and overcast. So I've moved. Hopefully the sun isn't distracting too much, because we are moving on to the most dramatic and saddest part of my story so far. So the Big Stooshie would never happen again. The personal toll was brutal. I had to shut down Core Audio, a business that I'd spent years building into something professional and profitable. But I had to sell all of the PA gear and lighting gear in an attempt to cover some of the costs that remained. Even then, it wasn't enough. I was left with no choice but to enter a partial bankruptcy agreement with my creditors. It was one of the hardest and most gut-wrenching moments of my life. I'd built something great and I'd tried to do something meaningful. And in the end, I was left with nothing but debt, disappointment, and the overwhelming question of what the hell do I do now?
Death in the family, a tragic loss.
If I thought the Big Stooshie was the worst thing that could have happened to me in 2012, I was horribly mistaken. Just a few months after the financial disaster of the festival, my family was hit with something far worse. Something no amount of planning, money, or resilience can fix. On July 31st, and completely out of the blue, my brother-in-law Paul passed away, a sudden and massive heart attack. He was 32. He left behind a 4-year-old son, Lewis, a devastated family, and grief that none of us were prepared for. Paul, of course, was a close member of our family. And when someone that young, so full of life, is suddenly gone, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't feel real. One minute everything's normal, the next just standing in the middle of a nightmare that you can't wake up from. Losing Paul changed everything. It put everything into perspective. The stress, the money problems, the business losses, none of it really mattered in comparison to losing someone so young, so suddenly. 2012 had already been a brutal year, but this was the moment that broke us. As a family, we had no choice but to pull together to support each other and to try and move forward. But nothing was ever quite the same again. After Paul's death, Amanda and Sadie were understandably devastated. Losing someone so suddenly changes everything. And for a while, the priority wasn't about making plans, it was just about holding things together. Sadie now lived alone in her late second husband's home, just 3 doors down from us. Naturally, Amanda spent a lot of time there. She and Danny would spend most of her time at Sadie's or escaping to our caravan in St Andrews, trying to process their loss. Me, well, as always, I wasn't one for sitting around for too long.
AirBNB.
By 2018, AirBNB had fully taken off, transforming the way people travelled. More and more holidaymakers were ditching hotels in favour for private rentals, and something clicked for me. I had an opportunity staring me in the face. At the top of my garden was my office, 25 square metres of perfectly functional space. It was more than big enough for me to live alone, and if I could make this small sacrifice, it would free up our actual home for us to turn into an Airbnb rental. So after discussing this with Amanda, we decided to go for it. She moved into Sadie's with Liam and Danny. I transformed my office into my living area. Now, the house needed some work before it was ready for guests. Luckily, my great friend Ewan, yes, the very same Ewan from the Big Stooshie, was on hand to help. Together, we completely renovated and modernised the house. I invested nearly £50,000 into the improvements. We even installed a hot tub. If there's something holidaymakers love, it's the promise of sitting in warm, bubbling water with a drink in hand. In the spring of 2019, we were ready to go. We welcomed our first guests in April, and the first year, well, It was a huge success. The house was fully booked and the income was fantastic. Things looked even better for 2020. We had the entire year reserved in advance by early March, and the predicted income was nearly £60,000. For once, it seemed like I'd finally made the right decision and the right business move at the perfect time. Then, disaster struck. Again.
The pandemic.
In March 2020, life and business came to a screeching halt. Like all holiday accommodation businesses, my AirBNB was shut down overnight by the Scottish Government. I was legally forced to cancel every single booking I had for this year and the following one. But unlike traditional employees, I wasn't entitled to furlough. My business was too new to qualify for any meaningful government support. But of course, the bills and the loan repayments, they didn't stop. The house renovations had been entirely funded through personal debt. And suddenly, the golden opportunity that I'd built for myself was becoming another financial disaster. For the second time in my life, I had made what seemed like a perfect business move, only to have circumstances completely beyond my control rip the rug from under me. While COVID took a lot away, it also gave me one rare gift, and that was time. With no travel or business or ability to leave the house, I found myself with absolutely nothing to do. And if there's one thing I'm bad at, it's sitting still.
The Lost Smithfield Album.
Completely out of the blue, an idea resurfaced from 30 years earlier, the Smithfield Entertainment's album. Back in the 1990s, Ian Harrow and I had recorded a compilation album of local bands that performed at our Fife Rock Festival. But due to a lack of funds, the album was never actually released, and the recordings were lost to time, or so we thought. Then what could only be described as a miracle happened. We tracked down Dave Gray, the original sound engineer who'd recorded the sessions at the Sound Cafe studios in Pennycook, and unbelievably, he still had the master tapes. With nowhere to go and nothing to do, Ian and I got to work and cleaned up the audio, remastered the tracks, and finally, after 3 decades, released the album under its new title, The Lost Cafe Sessions. It all went live on major streaming platforms on the 22nd of October 2022. But we didn't just stop there. My son Liam, now a media production student at Sunderland University, also got involved and narrated a full compilation podcast telling the stories behind the albums. Now, financially, this was never a business move, and any money that we were going to make from it, which was nothing, was all donated to charity or pledged to charity. But it was purely about finishing off something that had been left undone for 30 years. In a strange way, it was exactly what I needed during COVID. The project gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to connect with Ian, and perhaps more importantly, it allowed me to work on something with my son, who had just moved away from home for the first time, and who I couldn't visit during these lockdowns. It was the kind of thing that made an otherwise horrible time a little more bearable. And for once, something unfinished from my past finally had the ending it deserved.
Fed up with British politics.
One of the biggest things about the COVID years wasn't the financial hit, it was the boredom. With all the time in the world to reflect, I started looking back on my life and realizing something uncomfortable. Despite all my ambition, hard work, and constantly chasing new business ventures, I'd fallen short in so many of them. And the reason, more often than not, was just simply bad timing. Every time I thought I was onto a winner, something would come up. An economic crash, a festival flop, a global pandemic, and I'd be back to square one. And then I had a bit of a revelation. Through all this, one thing has remained steady. One constant source of income had never let me down, and that was the scientific software business. Through all the ups and downs, it had quietly supported my family. And, most importantly, I didn't need to be in Scotland to do it. At this point, my customers are all over the world, and I manage sales and marketing remotely from my garden office in Scotland. And then it hit me. I could just become a digital nomad. As long as I've got a phone, a laptop, and an internet connection, I can set up shop anywhere in the world.
Leaving the UK.
Now, by the end of 2021, COVID restrictions were starting to ease, but my frustration with Scotland and the UK as a whole had reached an all-time high. I was sick of the constant political upheaval, first Brexit and then never-ending talk of Scottish independence. Scotland felt like a country that was stuck in limbo, torn between staying in the UK and breaking away, but there was no real plan for what came next. And with every election, the uncertainty got worse. And then there's the weather. I'd had 50 years of enduring Scottish winters, 50 years of grey skies, relentless rains, and then summers which sometimes just last for 3 days. I'd had enough. It was time to go.
Would Bitcoin make Jimmy rich at last?
Around 2018, I started dabbling in cryptocurrency investments. Nothing serious, just a bit of fun. But by late 2020, that bit of fun had turned into something a bit more serious. What started as a modest investment had grown significantly, and after running some basic calculations, I realized that if the trend continued, I could be looking at a substantial nest egg, enough potentially to retire early one day. It was a gamble, but for the first time I had some options. So the search was on. We needed a country somewhere with better weather, lower cost of living, and ideally a crypto-friendly environment. After a lot of research, one place kept coming to the top of the list: Portugal. It has the best weather in Europe, affordable cost of living, and, at the time anyway, a very friendly tax system for crypto investors. So the decision was made. I was getting out.
Moving to Portugal.
So we had 2 houses and nearly 30 years worth of possessions to sort through. And if you've ever tried to move house, you'll know that shifting even from a small flat can feel like an impossible task. Now imagine trying to move an entire life, not just across town or to another part of the UK, but in an entirely different country. We had to be ruthless. I bought a small trailer and that was it. That was all we had. That was our limit. Whatever couldn't fit in the trailer had to be given away, sold or scrapped. Years of accumulated junk, furniture, clothes, and sentimental items were all gone. But honestly, once I got over the initial stress, it was actually quite liberating. We weren't just moving house, we were starting afresh.
The journey south.
On October 19th, I left Auchtermuchty for the very last time. It was me, Danny, and Sadie's 2 dogs, mother and daughter duo, Tanzel and Coco, crammed into the car, towing our little trailer of essentials behind us. Our first stop was Portsmouth on the south coast of England. From there, we boarded the ferry to Santander in Spain, and after a long but beautiful drive through Spain, we finally arrived at our new home in Portugal. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the sunset was setting, casting a perfect golden glow over the Algarve. We'd made it. Then, a week later, Amanda and Sadie arrived, flying into Faro Airport. And just like that, the whole family were together again in our new house. And that was it. The start of a new chapter.
We arrive in Portugal, but the perfect storm is on the horizon.
You know, I've always had big ideas, good intentions and plenty of ambition, but timing has never been on my side. So when we arrived in Portugal, full of excitement and plans for a fresh start, what happens? The crypto market peaks exactly 9 days after we move in. I'd been investing for a couple of years, and by this point, things were looking quite promising. But as luck would have it, the market crashed, and it kept crashing for the next 2 years. It just kept nosediving, and that was just the start of our troubles. On a global scale, the world was still reeling from COVID, and to make matters worse, international conflicts were driving prices up everywhere. One of the biggest shocks was the UK energy crisis. Gas and electric costs in the UK tripled overnight. Mortgages went through the roof. Now, back in Scotland, our AirBNB was a solid income stream. It was fully booked and was bringing in some great money, but suddenly the running costs skyrocketed. It was clear that what had once been a profitable business was becoming a financial liability. And I had a difficult decision once again. After almost 30 years of calling this house home, we had to accept a reality. We couldn't keep it. Less than a year after moving to Portugal, we sold the house in Scotland. Again, I'd done nothing wrong. My decisions were calculated and made absolute sense until it all changed again. Timing is everything.
Liam struggles.
If we hadn't already had enough stress with the crypto crash, the AirBNB business collapsing, and selling our home of 30 years, life decided to throw us one more challenge. This time, it wasn't about business or bad timing, it was personal. It was about Liam. Liam had done everything right. He went to university, studied hard, earned a great degree in media production from Sunderland University. And like many graduates, he decided not to jump straight into his master's degree. Instead, he started doing some temporary jobs in retail and hospitality while applying for work within his field. Meanwhile, we'd moved to Portugal, and he was still living in Scotland with his partner, figuring out his next steps. Then, out of the blue, things fell apart. His living situation became untenable, and he found himself homeless. The solution was obvious to us. He needed to come to Portugal. Of course, we welcomed him with open arms. He could stay with us. But there was one big problem. Because of Brexit, UK citizens couldn't stay in Portugal for more than 90 days without a visa. Liam continued to apply for jobs in the UK, but nothing solid came through. Weeks turned into months, and soon we had a big decision to make. For Amanda and Sadie, getting Portuguese residency was easy, as they were both Irish citizens. This meant they were also EU citizens. I gained my residency through marriage to Amanda, and Danny, of course, qualified as a dependent child. But Liam, he was 25 years old. That meant he wasn't classed as a dependent child, so there was no automatic path for him. I knew I had to solve this problem. He had no future in the UK, nowhere to live. So I did what any father, I guess, would do, and I created an opportunity for him. I offered him a job with my new Portuguese company, which managed my software business. And Liam was going to help out with social media and website design and this type of thing. It wasn't a bit easy, and there was a lot of hurdles along the way, but one thing's certain. Through his employment with my company, Liam qualifies for residency, but it's not a quick process. But the story does have a happy ending. In this week, after nearly 2 years, Liam has finally had his application accepted, and we expect to receive his residency documents in the post at any time.
Party time at Jimmy's.
Now let's talk about something completely different. And I somehow became the unofficial party host of the Algarve. From a quiet life to non-stop socialising. Back in Scotland, our social life was pretty relaxed. We had a small group of friends, and it was totally normal to go for a month or two without any social gatherings whatsoever. But in Portugal, that all changed. Suddenly, I found myself in the centre of a growing friend group. And why? Well, I had a big house, plenty of space, a swimming pool, and most importantly, a fridge that was always stocked with wine and beer. A perfect combination during the Algarve's long, hot summers. Before I knew it, my house became the go-to spot for social gatherings. And at first, don't get me wrong, it was fantastic. Fun nights, endless laughs, and making great memories with new friends. But it just started to get a bit out of control. What had started as occasional get-togethers were turning into almost daily gatherings. At first, I didn't mind. I enjoyed being the host, and it was great to be surrounded by new people. But so many people were turning up completely uninvited at any time of the day or any day of the week, and they'd stay for hours. And of course, because I'm too polite, I always let them in. Let me be clear, I've never had an issue with drinking. But what I quickly realised was a lot of my new Portuguese friends did. In Scotland, we call them lightweights. Certain people that can't handle their drink. A few drinks in and then someone would become overly emotional, needy, or just downright aggressive. The party-going atmosphere I'd enjoyed in the past really didn't exist anymore, and I just got more and more involved in other people's drama and problems. And I recognised the common denominator was, of course, alcohol.
Getting sober.
On February 26th, 2024, I stopped drinking alcohol completely. No big announcement, no last night out, I just cut it out of my life. And now, I've passed my first anniversary of sobriety, and I can say with absolute certainty, it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. Don't get me wrong, I still love a good get-together, but prefer to have them without the constant hangovers, bad decisions, and random people passing out in my garden.
Algarve Appetite and Oceanview Creations.
Algarve Appetite. When I stopped drinking, I knew I needed to fill the void with something more constructive. Sitting around reflecting on life over cups of tea just wasn't my style, and I needed a new project. And as luck would have it, it was staring me right in the face. With my son Liam's degree in media production, he had the skills and I had the ideas. And thanks to many impulsive purchases, I also had a ridiculous amount of camera gear, microphones, and lighting equipment sitting around gathering dust. So what was going to stop us from starting a YouTube channel? Absolutely nothing. And 1st of May 2024, we uploaded our first video and Algarve Appetite was born. Now here's what no one tells you about YouTube. Making a video is easy. Making a good video is hard. Making a good video that people actually want to watch, that's entirely different and sometimes nearly impossible. There's the filming, the editing, the sound mixing, the thumbnails, the SEO, the analytics, and that's before you even start building an audience. I love a challenge, and bit by bit, we started to figure all these things out. Once we got into the swing of things, I had another realization. We already had all the high-end gear, and we already knew how to shoot and edit professional quality footage. So why not put this to use? So later in 2024, we launched Oceanview Creations, a photography and videography service designed for businesses, events, real estate agents, and content creators here in the Algarve. It was another way to expand our creative work while actually making some money at the same time. Algarve Appetite is still in its early days, but the goal is clear. Grow the channel, build a community, and eventually monetize so it becomes a sustainable, ongoing project. Who knows? Maybe one day this little YouTube experiment will turn into something far bigger than we ever imagined.
Jimmy's hopes and dreams.
That brings us to today. Looking back, it's been a hell of a journey. From the milk float escapades of my teenage years to failed businesses, unexpected tragedies, and more reinventions than I can count. But despite everything, I've always kept moving forward. We've still a long way to go before Algarve Appetite is fully monetized. We're making steady progress, and if people keep watching, subscribing, and enjoying what we put out, we'll hopefully hit the big milestone in the coming months. At the same time, we're laying down the foundations of Oceanview Creations, which who knows, could grow into something amazing, and a great opportunity for Liam and Danny in their later years. On the personal side, after what felt like an impossible battle with bureaucracy, Liam is now an official Portuguese resident, and that's a huge win for our family. Now, I'd love to say that at 56 years old, I'm ready to slow down and enjoy the sunset and spend my days sipping coffee while I watch the world go by. But let's be honest, that's not really me. There's still so much I want to do, so many ideas, so many projects and adventures I want to explore. One of my long-standing dreams is to own a sailboat. Not for any grand round-the-world voyage, but simply the joy of being on the water, away from the noise and just sailing. One of my best memories as a teenager and young adult came from sailing trips in the US with an old family friend. There's something about the mix of freedom, adventure, and sheer tranquility of being on the ocean that's always stuck with me. Back in Scotland though, forget it. Sailing opportunities were limited to about 2 months a year, and that's if you're lucky. And didn't mind battling the cold, the wind, and the rain. Not exactly the relaxing experience I had in mind. But the Algarve, well, that's a completely different story. The weather here means a boat can be used all year round, even in the middle of winter, when the temperatures are often still in the mid-teens. That means you can really enjoy sailing, and not just longingly staring at a vessel in storage for 10 months of the year. And let's be honest, it won't just be for me. A boat opens up a whole load of opportunities for creating new, incredible content for Algarve Appetite. Imagine exploring hidden caves, coastal adventures, and maybe even fishing trips.
Getting married again.
Remarriage. After being together since 1992 and officially tying the knot in 1997, Amanda and I are now approaching our 30th wedding anniversary, a milestone I'm both proud of and slightly bewildered by. I don't know how she's put up with me for so long. We wanted to do something special to mark the occasion, but it turns out that Portugal made that decision for us. You see, when we moved here, we discovered that our UK marriage is not recognised in Portugal. We are not legally married. So after 3 decades together, Amanda and I are technically getting married for the first time, or at least in the eyes of Portuguese law. Rather than seeing this as a bureaucratic headache, we decided to embrace it, and we're going to have a wedding. Again, same bride, same groom, just in a better, more sunny location. We're planning the big day for summer 2027, which is right on our 30th wedding anniversary. The only difference is this time Amanda knows exactly what she's getting into. So there you have it, 53 years of adventures, businesses, disasters, recoveries, reinventions and relocations, all crammed into this rather long YouTube video. Of course, I couldn't fit it all in. I left out the time I spent 3 months working in a summer camp with my mate Smart when we were about 20, or the 2 businesses that I started with Ewan, one of which led to an all-expenses paid trip to Malaysia, courtesy of Panasonic. I have to say, not everything has gone the way I've planned, and far from it, but I can honestly say I've had a great life, filled with opportunities, failures, wild ideas, and most importantly, an incredible family who always supports me. Now, for the first time in a long time, I'm hoping things will quieten down a little. I want to enjoy the incredible life we've built here in the Algarve, watch my kids carve their own paths, and one day sail off into the sunset on that dream boat with Amanda, who, after all these years, is still the love of my life. That's the story of Portuguese Jimmy, for now. Thanks for watching as always, and until the next time, adios amigos. Thank you so much for watching right to the end of the video. If you're interested in following us on our other social media, please check our link tree at Algarve Appetite, and the link will be in the description below. Also on screen is a link to a video which we think you'll really enjoy. And finally, click on the Algarve Appetite logo on screen to subscribe to our channel, and thank you for watching.